All right, welcome back to You're Absolutely Right, the hallucination-free podcast where two principal engineers talk about software, tech, and life. I'm Scott, and this is Wes. Wes, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Scott. How about yourself? Great intro, by the
Good.
way. That was
You like
fantastic.
it?
First
All
time
right.
hearing it. It was perfect.
That's right. I was thinking of also maybe like 42% less hallucinations than your average LLM, but um,
Either way, you're absolutely right.
I like it. The, and we could easily turn this into a game show if we
I
wanted
know.
to, because, yeah.
Oh,
Who's
I
the
was,
next contestant on You're Absolutely Right?
I
Come on
was
down.
thinking it would be a fun segment of like, is this AI or not? Right. And so whenever we can share screen or whatever, we can find things to see if we can trick each other and have like an actual game show segment, since it does
I
sound like
love that.
we're on a game show. You're absolutely right.
Didn't,
Then
like,
networks will
Primogen...
bring us on and we'll go big time.
There you go. That's going to be our ticket. Didn't,
Yeah.
like, the Primogen and them did a fake Family Feud show. I feel like we could
Yeah.
do the same thing where it's like, what are the top 5 answers to, things that an LLM is likely to hallucinate about or something like that?
That would be pretty great. All right. Put it on the list of things to do.
There you go. Okay, we have a huge show this week. It's huge. It's absolutely colossal and amazing. We're going to talk about testing in the age of AI. Deterministic end-to-end unit tests, evals, all those type of things. We got AWS Cloud Control, Convex. We have some cool voice AI stuff. And then we also have some news we have some industry topics we can talk about, like AI bubble mania, company leadership pushing for a certain percentage of code written by AI. And then if we have time, maybe some other stuff. Why don't we kick it off with testing? So one of the things that I've been running into recently on a project is in the age of AI, we have probabilistic testing. So in normal software engineering, we have deterministic testing, which is like end-to-end test, unit tests, things like that, where it's going to run the same every time as long as your code doesn't break. And if it breaks, that means something's wrong. You got to go fix it. But in the age of LLMs, we have a probabilistic testing. And then we have like a gray area in between where determinism and probabilism, which is a new word that I coined the other day. The problem that I had was you have evals, which is the way that you do testing on your LLM, but
Okay.
that is purely LLM responses. So you can send prompts to an LLM, have a conversation synthetically, and then you can evaluate how that conversation went. You can say, hey, did the user get what they were asking for? When I asked for this, did it say something like this? And you're not looking
Right.
for keywords or specific numbers or something like you would in a Cypress, like end-to-end test, but you're looking more for like did they get what they were looking for? Were they like upset or like things like that? And that works really well to test your just like LLM setup. And then
Sure.
on the front end, you have end-to-end tests. So you have like Cypress or Playwright, where you can be like, can I use the browser, click buttons, and is the right things being displayed? Can I enter text in this field and press submit, and does something happen, et cetera, et cetera. And then so those are useful. And then you have unit tests for like complex business logic, which I like using unit tests for when you have something that's just like kind of complex and you just want to make sure that it doesn't break. So then the gray area, that's the hard part to me, is if you do all those things, that is still not the way that the user will actually interact with your app. None of those things
Right.
cover that. So you
Right.
actually don't have end-to-end LLM testing anymore. And so you don't actually have a way to go to your chat application, add a prompt, and then like see what comes up in the UI, and then see what the response was, and then go through that whole
Right.
thing and include not only the transcription of the conversation, but also all of the UI UX that is happening during that session. So here's what I've come up with. I think there's a few ways to solve this. I don't have the perfect solution for this, by the way, but one of the things you can do is you can hack Playwright to actually control the browser, enter prompts, and then in your Playwright test, you can create a loop where your Playwright test will enter a prompt, it will send the prompt, it will wait for the response, it will send that response to an LLM to get the other response, like it pretends like it's the customer, and it kind of runs through it that way. And in the meantime, you can kind of be doing like screenshots and maybe having an LLM parse through those. That's the closest that I've gotten, and it feels pretty hacky. The other thing that I tried is using like a manual testing using like an AI browser, like Atlas or Comet.
Yeah.
You can actually ask it to do these things. And then there's another way is the Playwright MCP, which is kind of similar to the AI browser testing, where it will actually figure out what it needs to do next. So the problem that I've had with those last two things is that they're way too slow and they're way too token hungry. So if you ask it to do something, it'll be like, okay, I need to look at this page and figure out where the text input is, and then I need to figure out where the button is, and now I entered this text, and okay, now I need to figure out what to do next, and it just takes forever, and it probably costs like $20 to like run a full test, right? Because it's just so token hungry.
Yeah, and where do you have an artifact from that test run of whether it was successful or not, right? Like,
So you have to actually, in your Playwright test, those are manual testing. So you have to generate the artifact yourself. So what you could do is you could save a transcript of that conversation somewhere and then use LLM as a judge to look at it. But the problem is you have all the UI UX stuff that's going on. And in my case, it's heavy UI UX. It's not stuff that you can just test deterministically. So
right.
It's this weird gray area where I feel like this is not solved for yet that I know of.
Not that I've seen. And in your case specifically, you're talking more like an agent, an assistant that you're wanting to test your assistant that's actually outputting UI in the responses too, right? So you're needing to test that like it's rendering out the correct UI from the response from the agent, which is, we don't really know. There's no way of specifically saying, give it this prompt and have this specific output come. So that's the difference of maybe a lot of people listening are not testing an agent or an assistant output. And so that's kind of or at least the background of the context of what you're trying to do in this and why it's so difficult, because everything that you're doing is within an LLM agent. There's no other, like, you don't have any deterministic output, period. It's just an assistant that you're interacting with and building.
Yeah, and where if you think of that agent as something that can output maybe like dynamic UI,
Yeah.
that's it's not like a structure that's in the response that you then output on the front end. It's more like being controlled from elsewhere. I don't want to go into too many details, but it's just really hard to test.
Could you test individual tools? Like, so maybe you don't test like the actual full assistant output of going into a prompt and it calling the tools and stuff like that, but can you almost treat each tool and test it almost like a unit test? So you can give it some input and verify that the UI is outputted appropriately in that way.
Yeah, but in my case, I don't control all of the tools. Think of these as calling other agents that are
fair.
built somewhere that have their own kind of interface that I don't control. So I want to test if I hand off to this other agent and it displays something in the UI, is that a helpful thing? Like what did you do next? Was there an error? Like sometimes if the agent is not built well, it will in the text, it will tell you, yeah, I can do that. Sure, let me help you with that. But it won't actually be doing the thing. So that's the hard part.
Yeah. I mean, that gets into the whole boundaries of what you should be testing anyway, right? So, I mean, that's no different than like building a developer platform. Like, the owner of the developer platform shouldn't be responsible for testing every single app that a developer might build onto your platform. It's just going to be untenable. in that sense, because you don't know how they're going to behave, and there's just going to be so many different permutations that you would have to test for to properly get a good thing. So as I think that goes into the like, what is your testing boundary then, and should you be testing all of those tools or all those other agents that your agent is interacting with? Maybe not, depends on what it is. But if you're trying to interact with 20 or 30 other agents that you don't control, how are you going to ever really and fully test them appropriately?
Yeah, but like we want a way to test that as a project, not even as just me at a company wide
Yeah.
level. So
Yeah.
it's
I
it's
just,
just a difficult problem to solve right now.
it is. And then that's butting up against like my own thoughts around testing anyway, is that a lot of corporations test more than they need to and end up
Mhm.
creating useless tests anyway. And I think like this kind of shows where like what that boundary is. And in my opinion, I think testing other agents is maybe the wrong. You test the implementation somehow with the
Mhm.
agents that you own, and you can know that your platform basically, or your agent, is working well and integrates appropriately, and then it's up to the other agents to test their agents appropriately. But
Mhm. I
anyway,
got to tell you, I've come around a little bit on unit testing. I used to hate unit testing and not do it very much. I've come around a little bit, and the reason why is because nowadays I'm reviewing a lot of other people's code. And so when I see a really complicated function, like today I just saw a recursive function that was like, it was dealing with objects and arrays and it was doing recursion and all this stuff. And I'm like, add a unit test because this thing is it's super complicated. I just want to see that it works first of all without me
mhm.
having to verify it manually, and then I want to make sure that it does what you think it does, and then I want to know that it actually does that thing, and then making sure that because it's so complicated, if somebody tweaks this thing in the future, that we know it's going to require an update to the test and make sure that you meant to do that and all these type of things.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And my take on tests is if you're mocking something, that should be a smell. And that's where I don't like, or I struggle with a lot of tests. And my hot take too is I think AI, everybody claims that AI is so good at writing tests and it's going to change the world for test writing, like testing software. I think it's going to actually make it worse because it mocks
Just gonna be
so
too many
much
crappy
stuff.
tests.
Right.
Yeah.
Too many crappy tests
Hmm.
and just mocking everything. And if you're just mocking everything, what are you actually testing? You're testing your own tests, basically, at
Yeah.
that point. You're not testing the code. But for your case, I think a unit test is fully valid. If you can test something, a complex function that has a known input and a known output, that you can isolate it, then I think that's exactly what a unit test is for. But if you're sitting there and you're mocking every like API response, you're mocking every library response and all that stuff in your unit tests, and then you're just assuming that your mocked responses, or asserting that your mocked responses are correct at the end of your test, I think that test is useless. And I've seen AI write a lot of that stuff too.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I think it's helpful, but there's just what's your goal in testing? And I think your goal for your agent testing is valid. My question is, what are the boundaries then for what you should be effectively testing? And there's always going to be things that we butt up against as far as like percentages that ship coverage percentages that companies want and stuff like that, that maybe don't always mean anything, but it's still a valid question. What's the boundary of what you're testing, and how can you get there in the most deterministic way? Because I do think tests should be as deterministic as possible. Otherwise, again, what good are they
Well,
if
yeah,
you can't
that's
trust them,
unless it's
right?
evals. If you count an eval as a test, that's maybe I don't know how you call that, but it's definitely not deterministic. But it is still a valuable test
It is. Yeah, it's an
if
valuable
you can call it that.
evaluation, right? But
Yeah.
that would be like a percentage based rate, like, right? You could say
Yeah.
like evaluate this response and give me like a percentage correctness or validness. And so if you can say if it's over 80% or 90%, that the agent said this was a good response, then you can move forward. So I think just that's more the different approach you have to take with evaluations versus the very specific deterministic unit testing approach
Yeah.
that we normally take, right?
When I have AI write my tests, which I do a lot, admittedly, because the writing test is so boring. I tell it to write the smallest amount of tests possible to make sure that the major functionality doesn't have any regressions. And I found that's helpful because if you just say, write this feature for me and then write the tests, it'll write so many tests. And I look at it and everything is mocked. And I'm like, what even is this? And why are there
Right.
so many?
Yep. No, I agree. And I've done that too. I think I've also done the true TDD approach. But the difference is I didn't have it write the actual test logic. I just had it wrote the test like names of the test of what it should be testing. And then I reviewed that. And then I said, okay, now you can do the test logic. And then we could go do the implementation. And I had good success from that. So, I mean, I think you can do it. But again, it all goes back to delegate your work, don't delegate your thinking. You should still know what your tests are, and you should know what you're testing and how it should be tested before just letting an AI rip on your tests and just assume that it's writing tests and that you're writing safer software because of it.
Yeah. I will say I write a lot more tests now, or AI writes a lot more tests now. And even if they're not good tests, it's better than no tests. And I think that's true of when I review other people's PRs. I'm like, hey, just like add a unit test here. Like it's so easy to just have AI do it. And even if the test sucks, you can change it later. You can have the AI clean it up. You can clean it up yourself. But what happened before, including with documentation, is the same thing. We just, like a lot of people would not write any tests or any documentation because of just how time consuming it was. And
That's
so
fair.
now I think even having sloppy tests or sloppy docs is maybe better than not having any at all. Maybe that you could maybe argue that point.
Depends. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe not. But yeah. Either way, I mean, yes, tests are worth it. Tests are valid, but know what you're testing, know why you're testing, and know your testing boundaries. And don't just let an AI rip on your tests either, right? Like, just think about it.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of AI code, I'm going to jump around a little bit. There's a lot of companies are targeting their engineers to be writing a certain percentage of code with AI. I've heard figures of 50%, 70%. I've even heard some people say certain products are built with like 80, 90% AI code. What do you think about this type of target company wide? Is that the right thing that we should be shooting for?
No, but I think it's the easiest and first thing you should be shooting for. So, like, think of it if you're the CEO or whatever of a company and you're pushing to have AI, you have to be able to monitor it somehow. But we don't even have the infrastructure on how to use AIs, much less how to determine how they're being used, how much they're being used, and whether they're being used valuable. But so the first and easiest thing is just tracking the number of lines. But that's even still faulty too. Like, how do you really know when an agent has written those lines? You still have to do all that stuff. So, but I just think it's the easiest thing for corporations to track. And I think they have to be able to track something to show the value for the cost that's going into it, because it's not cheap to use it. And the quickest thing, just way to show value is, 70% of all of our code is written by AI. So that justifies the cost. But I think that we're going to see companies, and I think you're going to also see companies started to help solve this problem of tracking and monitoring AI usage within corporations, because you're going to want to do it. It's no different than corporations wanting to track engineering work anyway. And so a lot of times they would, and there are businesses around this too, like they would track your PRs, like how many commits you made to PRs, it's, like how quickly your PRs being merged in and stuff like that. Like, I think we're going to see similar things with AI too. It's just, we don't have the infrastructure or the time to implement those things to actually effectively monitor the value that AI is bringing you. But it's always easier to quantify something versus qualifying the value of AI. And so I think just companies have started with quantifying. Let's just quantify how many lines of code we can use, how much agents are being used, and then they'll move to qualifying how AIs are being used within that. So I don't love it. I don't think it's a good metric, but I also don't think there's anything else that we really have right now to have a metric. And if you're at a big corporation, you got to have a metric.
Yeah. I think it's also just like a flex for it's like what investors want to hear.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, it's like you mentioned with tracking engineering activity. Like if you look at your GitHub activity and assume that that somehow translates to the value that you've brought to your company, like that is the absolute wrong metric to look at.
Yep.
Because you can, that is just so easy to gamify and to just like it's like this red herring. It is completely misleading because it basically is like the more code you write, the more things you're doing, the more value you're bringing. But really, I mean, it may bring a lot more value to your company to be doing much smaller PRs because you're writing much more effective code, and it took you longer to write those 10 lines than it would have taken someone else to write just a big pile of crap in 1,000 lines. But like that looks better to the GitHub activity. So I think in my mind, I agree it's the wrong metric to track, and I agree that they will make adjustments for this. But I think it should be more about teaching how to use AI effectively. And I think that there's been a gap there. I mean, everybody is still learning the best way to use AI effectively. You and I talk about it a lot. And but I think that that's actually the more important thing is saying, hey, guys, like this product should not be built with 70% AI code because like from my personal experience, and I think from yours, that just means that you're letting the AI just go YOLO and you're going to end up with just a huge mess. And that may get you to product release faster, which looks good to product managers and investors and CEOs and people. But the maintainability and where that puts you, months or years down the line is going to be in a really bad place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the reporting is going to be mostly the same in the long run that companies are already doing, trying to find value for it. Because again, AI should just be a tool, right? It's not, or at least now, we're not in a place where it's a totally separate engineer that you can just let it run on its own, right? Like it's still a tool that we as engineers are using. So we, the engineers, should still be the ones being evaluated, not necessarily the AI tool being evaluated. And so I think it's still ultimately, is that engineer bringing value to the company? What are they doing to do that? How can we qualify the value of that engineering, the work that they're doing, just like we wouldn't look at their commit numbers or lines of code written by hand either. How do you track the value of the code that they're doing, and regardless of whether they're using an AI or not? So I think that's where it should be, but people will always still track AI and treat it like a separate entity.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to things that we've been learning or using lately. I'm interested to hear about Convex from you.
Yeah.
Let's dive into that.
It's all still new to me, so take it with a grain of salt, what I'm learning. But I just started a new playground app with it to test out some stuff. And mostly Tanner Lindsley has talked about this and its recommended use with TanStack Start, or it's like a recommended partner. And so I just thought I'd give it a try. I thought originally that Convex was just a database and like a real-time.
This is Convex.dev, by the way.
Yeah, Convex.dev. I thought it was just a database, but as I've dug into it, I've actually realized it's a whole lot more. And I think probably the closest thing you could maybe compare it to, and this could still be off, is like Firebase or something like that. But one of its goals is like real time, always in sync data. And so that is super nice and super cool. Like you can make a mutation in your UI and your data is immediately there. No loading, no whatsoever. It's like optimistic mutations everywhere. And so Convex is really nice because everything is just TypeScript code. You don't have like a separate Prisma schema that has a Prisma SDL, or I mean, I know Drizzle's TS, but it still has its own thing. Like this just feels like you're writing TypeScript for everything. A mutation to update the data isn't like a specific ORM. It's just a nice function or mutation or query that you're working with. And so I'm super familiar with TypeScript. I like working with TypeScript, and that works out well, that it just feels like you're writing code. You're not doing anything crazy that at a database level. And the second thing that I've really liked about it is it integrates super well with a React query. And so I'm using TanStack Start, using React Query, Convex, and all that stuff, and using a lot of the TanStack family. But it's really nice to be able to define like a query and query function in Convex, and then you just pass that to like a use suspense query with TanStack, and it's done. Everything's taken care of for you. The data's there immediately. You don't have to do any invalidating of queries or anything like that. The minute you make a mutation, it automatically handles all of that for you. And so the code is, I'm writing a lot less code to deal with just simple CRUD things than I would if I was using Drizzle. And I love Drizzle. I think it's a great ORM, and Prisma or whatever, but like it's still less code, which I like, and I can understand exactly what's happening. So that's kind of like the data level, real time, great integration with TanStack. But then I've also realized it has like workflow type logic in it. So if you're familiar with like ingest or upstash workflow, or even Vercel's new workflow, I think it's like durable workflows. If you send an event, it's going to be retried, and like you can assure that that event triggers a function and that function is going to run.
Like
And so,
temporal?
yeah, like temporal. Convex has like, from what I've seen, and I haven't gone super in depth, but it's like maybe a minimal workflow. And so you can define what are called actions, and they can be called in mutation. So say like you are building like an accounting system with QuickBooks or something like that, and you want to keep a record. You want to allow your users to create a transaction, and then you want to create that transaction in the QuickBooks system. Well, you can have a create transaction convex mutation that adds the transactions to your database, but then you can call like you can schedule an action that would then call the QuickBooks API to write that transaction to there. And so you can schedule it to run immediately, or you can schedule it to run in 5 minutes or whatever. And it also has cron scheduling as well for these actions to run. And so they're just actions within the Convex runtime or Node runtime that you can interact with other third-party services or call other queries or mutations in there. So it's really kind of like its own workflow system that they've designed, which is nice because then you don't have to like go and bring in temporal or Vercel or ingest or whatever and have a whole nother system to do these workflows. And a lot of times those workflow systems are actually a lot more durable than what you really need. And it seems like Convex is just a very simple, nice action workflow system built into their stuff. So I'm still exploring that, but it's been really nice to be in the same library and same family of stuff. And then the other thing that I've seen that I haven't touched is they also have like file storage too, and apparently vector search. So yeah, I mean they say like like database, vector search, cron jobs, file storage, and then they're server functions, and those are what the actions are, right? And so they're basically like, I think they're not lambdas, but they're like lambdas or like Cloudflare workers that they're just a function that runs and does that code. It can interact with your database or a third-party service. So yeah, I mean, that's something like real-time updates. Oh, it's type safe. I mean, it's TypeScript. So everything's type safe, which is really nice too. So
Yeah, it seems like they're trying to be like the whole stack almost. It's a lot. It's a lot of different things that they're doing.
Yeah, at least for data management. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would definitely give it a shot. It's really cool. I mean, I think you can see just on their homepage like how little code is there, just how easy it is to reason about what's happening. And then, I mean, I think just a lot of their stuff like actions and stuff makes it better. Oh, and they have like Clerk integration. So I do have that. Like I actually integrated Clerk and Convex. And so like it'll automatically authenticate with Clerk to make sure, because that is one like little gotcha. All of your mutations and queries, if you don't put authentication on them, they're open or they're like accessible, externally accessible. But as long as you
Oh,
use
this is
something,
like
yeah,
the
it's like,
Firebase thing, like
yeah,
how
and it's
they
like, go
there's
ahead.
big security holes in Firebase because people forgot that these were that everything was like public by default, and
Yeah,
there's like a big scandal. I forget who it was though.
I'm not sure either, but like server actions with Next.js had the same problem too, right? And I think because at the end you have to kind of think of them as just like API endpoints underneath, and like a tan stack server function is no different. It's just basically creating another API route. And if you don't have authentication, you're opening up an API route to the public. And it's just, I think part of the struggle is we've abstracted out that mental model into these nice libraries and nice APIs that are really easy to use that you forget that that's essentially what you're doing under the covers. And that's part of the reason why I like TanStack server function is because it feels more like creating an API route because you create a server function, you have to create a handler on that, you have to define the method of get, post, or whatever on that. And so it just kind of has that mental model of an API endpoint, but then still there's some things that I think it's just that mental model of like it's easy to forget that underneath it's still like you're responsible for securing your own stuff 99% of the time.
Yeah, cool. I want to hop over to a cool find, and it
Yeah.
is this Sesame app. So if you go to app.sesame.com, I'm going to try to do this. I don't know if the audio is going to come through. Maybe I'll splice it in later. But if you actually, it's this crazy voice model that you can actually chat with. And it has, can you hear that?
No, I think it's
Oh,
just going to your headphones.
okay. So what I'm going to do is maybe I'll just splice this in later. But it's a super crazy voice model that just sounds like a human, has emotion inflection. It has like zero latency, and it's experimental at this point, I believe, by this company. It's not like an open product or anything, but I think it just kind of shows you where we're going in the future very, very quickly with voice, where it's going to sound like a real human, like in 2026.
Yeah.
So soon. And 11 Labs has a new model of E3 that is also coming out, and I'm sure other companies do as well. So we've been working on some voice AI stuff, which we'll probably cover in another episode, but it's working really well, and it's shocking how good it is.
It was creepy.
Yeah,
Like
it is
when I listened to it, because you know it's fake, but it doesn't sound fake, and so it makes your brain twist in that, being like, this is just weird because I know this is a computer, but it doesn't sound like one. So.
I wonder if they're gonna have to dial back the realism because of the creepy factor. Because I feel like with the voice models that I'm using today, they're not as good, and so you can kind of tell it's fake, but it's way better than like the voice agent used to call and be like, our hours have changed. What would you like to do next? And you can only say one word, and it always got it wrong. And you just be like,
Yes.
agent,
No.
agent, agent. Yeah. And you just wanted to get to like a person as quickly as possible. But they're so good now that I actually think very soon we're going to get to the point where people would rather talk to an AI than a human, because the AI is going to be so helpful and so fast, and you don't have to feel awkward about any societal conventions of like, I don't know what I'm talking about, so I'm going to ask a dumb question, or like, I'm
That's
sorry to
fair.
keep you waiting, or like my kids are loud in the background. With an AI, you don't care about any of that. And you could just like ask it questions and get stuff done.
Yeah, I mean, I think not having to have any wait time would be fantastic.
Yes.
I had to call the IRS or something this year, because they were trying to add a fee and all that. But I mean, I was sitting there waiting for like hours. Thankfully, they had a callback thing, but still, I'm like, if you don't have to have a wait time, I'll talk to an AI all day long as it can accomplish a job. But there's still going to be so many things that like an AI is not going to be able to approve lifting like a fee or something like that.
Right.
You're going to have to
Yeah.
still talk to a real person. And so I think that handoff is going to be interesting, figuring out when to do handoffs and making agents smart enough to know how to hand it off. But anyway, Sesame was unbelievably good. I don't know how much I want to talk to agents myself, but I think that's me. I process
I
better
think you're in the
writing.
minority.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, like I actually thought that would be the majority. That has not been my experience. I think you're in the minority. And I think it's because you're like heavy into tech and you know more of what's going on. But most people are just like, whoa, this thing sounds like a human and it's actually helpful. All right. You know?
Yeah. You're probably right. And I think I don't process well like auditorily, and I always process by writing and reading versus visually or hearing. So I think that's part of it, as well as I don't want to sit there and listen while an AI takes a really long time to respond. And even with the Sesame thing, I found myself getting annoyed with the length of time that it was taking, even though there's no latency or whatever. But like I wanted it to talk at like 2 times speed for
Mm.
me, versus like normal conversation. Because I think that's part of it. When I'm with an agent, I don't really want to have a normal conversation with an
Mm-hmm.
agent, right? Like I want it to give me the answer as fast as it
You want it to be
possibly can.
transactional. Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
totally. Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think that's me. I think that's how I use it. I want my responses in text chat agents to be as fast as possible, and I just wanted to get to the answer and get to the solution. But a lot of people aren't going to be like that. They're going to have
Yeah.
conversations, normal conversations.
Yeah, I'm really bullish on AI voice. I think it's going to be a huge unlock for sales, support, and other things. I've personally used support AI that was voice that was so good. I had actually never used a chatbot on a website because they're all so terrible, but this one
Mm-hmm.
was the 11 Labs voice one on their documentation. Highly recommend you just go to 11 Labs documentation and chat with the voice agent, and ask how you integrate and questions, because it would just be like, what can I help you with? Oh, I need to do this and I need to integrate here. And it's be like, okay, let me take you to that page and be like, oh, can you explain this one thing to me? Yeah, and it did, and it actually had like in-depth knowledge of stuff that
Mm-hmm.
like wasn't even in the documentation, and so that to me was just like shockingly valuable.
Yeah.
So there is no technical reason why we can't do that and make it even better than that and have all the customer context. And if there's an error on the page, it pops up and says, hey, I see you're encountering an error. Here's how you fix it, like proactively, all that kind of stuff. There's just no reason why we can't do that. And so I'm super bullish on that. And I think it's going to happen way sooner than most people think. Like this is going to be a big 2026 story, I think.
All right.
So,
Well, we'll
so
put that on the bets. Put some money
that's
on it.
right. That's right. Another voice thing that's really cool, which I think we've talked about before, but you
Yeah.
actually turned me on to Wisprflow, and which is just transcription, but
Right.
it's really changed the way that I work, because instead of typing, I just transcribe, and I've actually seen other people saying the same thing. I think it's going to be huge.
Yeah, I agree. And I've used that more, for certain things. And well, the difference too with Wisprflow is like it allows you to talk in any input on your machine. Doesn't matter where it is. You just click into an input and you can talk and it'll just transcribe it. And and improve what you said and paste it into the input, right? So like it
And it's
strips out all
really
your
fast.
and stuff like that. It's really
Yeah.
fast, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's fantastic for planning. And so like if I have a big project, I'll get Wisprflow and I'll just sit there and I'll talk and I'll say like, I don't know what I'm thinking here. And I'll sit there and pause and stuff like that while I think. And it doesn't throw it for a loop at all. It just keeps listening and it strips all that out. And so I agree. For being able to just like ramble and brainstorm what you want to work and then get that into a better like transcription to then give to an LLM is great. Where I've hit the walls with it is wanting to put context into my prompts. And so I'm always like selecting files to give to my prompts to agents of like, okay, this is where this code is. This is where this code is. You need to go look at this file. You need to read this plan. I've I don't want to like I find myself not using Wisprflow when I'm going to have stuff like that because I don't really want to go to Wisprflow and have it transcribe it and then have to go back into the input and then find all the files, right? I just usually type it out in that case too. But so if there's a way that I could say like have it add context somehow, the way you can with coding agents, that would be like perfect.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
And I really like it because I use it for normal stuff too. Like if I just writing down ideas or if I'm going to write a blog post, but instead of typing, I just dictate it. And I found that it's way more accurate than even like your phone dictation is. So it's super, super useful.
Nice.
Oh, yeah. So, okay. So I want to get to the bubble thing. And
Yeah.
before we end here, so there's an article on Stratechery called The Benefits of Bubbles. One of the things that's been going around the news is AI bubble mania. Of course, we have all these companies like NVIDIA and OpenAI and Microsoft and all these companies that are kind of like, I don't know what you call it, sort of investing in each other, and there's this weird loop and people are like, oh, this is a huge bubble, and some people are like it's fraud and all this kind of stuff. And I actually haven't heard anybody say like, no, it's not a bubble. Like I think everybody kind of just knows that this is a bubble. But
Mm-hmm.
this article actually talked about the positive side of bubbles, which I thought was really interesting because it just was a refreshing perspective. It was like, yes, we're in a bubble, but here's some good things about bubbles. So some of the good things about bubbles, if we think about the internet bubble, you have like the .com era. It brought the entire U.S. population online, which cannot be understated how important that was because that basically invented the entire internet business industry because now you had all these customers to sell to. And during that time, then you had all this innovation in hardware and software and physical build out. So you had all the internet fiber. You had valuable inventions in software. Like he talked about how XML HTTP request was actually one of the inventions of this era, which is like the foundation of, all the SaaS software and all that kind of stuff. And then hardware infrastructure. And then now the same type of thing is happening in the AI boom where we have a lot of investment in chips, data centers, energy, and obviously software, and how this is actually a good thing. So if you don't have a bubble, what happens is you have stagnation possibly. So bubbles can actually be this good thing because it encourages all this investment, encourages people to take risks, it encourages all these hardware and infrastructure build outs. And in the case of the internet boom, it took many, many years to realize the value from those. And obviously there was tremendous value. It just was not realized within enough time for those companies to remain solvent. So a lot of them went under. And then only later was that value realized by other companies that then later built on top of it. So some of the differences with this one is that a lot of the value is already here today. Because if you, back in the day, like you couldn't use mobile phones, the internet was really slow. You didn't have a bunch of software built on it that was really useful. But right now you can actually go and use ChatGPT or Claude and immediately find value. And obviously those companies already have a staggering amount of revenue. Plus, a lot of the companies in this already have other lines of revenue, like Microsoft and Apple. I guess not so much of an AI story, but many of these other companies. So they're not like these kind of vaporware companies like
Right.
Pets.com. So that's why I think it's different, and it's a refreshing article to hear the good parts about it.
No, I agree. And I think it brought up some things that I hadn't really thought about. And I think the main concept was like constraint is a good thing. And I think with AI, our constraint right now is energy and it's chips. Um, and when you have something constraining you, that causes people and companies to innovate new things. And when you don't, I mean, you can see it with energy today. Is like we're not super investing in nuclear, not super investing in wind, or not super investing into these alternative energy that we could be using. But with AI consuming so much, it's causing a constraint. It's going to cause people to innovate in new ways, whether that's more nuclear energy or just maybe even a completely new type of energy that nobody's even ever fathomed before, right? Like, and I think that's the exciting thing is like, what is going to be that new, like, revolution that happens, like the industrial revolution happened 100 years ago or whatever now. Like it, I don't know if it is like AI or if it's going to be an underlying thing like energy that completely unlocks 1,000 or 1,000,000 other things as well as unlocking for AI, right? And so I think that's cool, and I think that's a good thing about a bubble, and you have to kind of have that to be giving people and companies the freedom to really innovate, um, and the push to do that. And so I think that was the biggest takeaway that I had from that, where like, I mean, everything that goes up must come down to some degree, but I hope while it's going up, we also have some really cool breakthroughs that maybe we won't even see the fruition of that immediately, but like with all the internet grid and stuff like that you were talking about, but maybe we'll see it in years to come after that. And we'll look back and say, oh, that was because of the AI bubble.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why
Yeah.
all this exploded.
Yeah. And a couple of the interesting things, like you mentioned there, as far as energy, there's been a renewed interest in nuclear, especially from some of the big software companies like
Mm-hmm.
Meta and others who've been heavily investing in nuclear. And part of it is certainly because of the energy needs of AI. The data center build out also, one of the interesting parts that they mentioned was that these sort of chips have a shorter shelf life than like internet fiber, for example. Like internet fiber, we're still kind of using it today from what was
Mm-hmm.
built, in the dot-com boom. However, these chips have a much shorter shelf life, but I do think that the chips will just probably be repurposed or something else, and we'll come up with more efficient ways to use old chips. Or maybe we'll find a completely new use case for them, like something, I don't know, gaming or something completely new. And then building out all this physical infrastructure, especially in America, investing more in chip fabs, I think is
Yep.
super important to decrease our reliance on foreign chips.
Yep.
An interesting thing that you brought up actually was that NVIDIA is a fabless company, which means that they don't create their own chips. They rely on TSMC in Taiwan, which I wasn't aware of.
I
But
wasn't either, but yeah. They
yeah.
design
So
them and
yeah,
they're the brains behind them, but they're not the actual fabricator of
but
them.
they're the most valuable company ever, right?
Yeah.
And they don't even make their own stuff. That's
Yeah.
crazy to me.
Which that to me feels like a bubble, right? Um,
Mhm.
but I mean, they also got to be smart enough to know how to build the chips to
Yeah,
tell other people how to fabricate them. But yeah, but still,
I
the
mean,
other thing, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a chart that I can put up, and it's showing valuations in the dot-com bubble versus today, and it was showing like Microsoft was valued at 60x revenue. This is PE ratios. I don't exactly know what that means. I'm pretty sure it's like revenue, like 60x revenue or something like that. But anyways, 120x for Oracle, 130x for Cisco. And then today, this was in the dot-com bubble. And then today
Yeah.
you have Google, NVIDIA, Apple, and Microsoft all at about 30% or less. I'm sorry, 30x or less. So we're not even anywhere near these type of valuations. So I definitely think it's a bubble, and it's definitely going to pop. Like, at least the stock market is going to drop for sure at some point.
Yeah.
But is it the same thing as the dot-com bubble? I would say definitely not.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on how much revenue all these tools keep generating when the bubble pops, right? Or all these companies, not just tools. And I think that maybe that is one benefit of Google and Apple and everybody still having revenue generating businesses, even without AI will help. But I don't know. We'll see. Either way, interesting times. Hopefully it drives some new, unbelievably cool invention or innovation that we've just never seen before, like cars from horses and all that stuff.
Yeah. Hopefully we get our jetpacks finally.
That'd be sweet. I'm down for that.
Yeah. All right, Wes. This was another great episode.
Always pleasure.
Yep. We'll catch you on
All
the next
right.
one.
Sounds good. See ya.
See ya.